moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over Hollow Creek Farm. Shadows danced among the rows of corn, whispering secrets that only the night could hold. The air was still, heavy with anticipation, and somewhere deep in the heart of this seemingly peaceful land, danger crept in silence. It was the perfect night for a robbery, the kind of dark, quiet evening that can lure the unsuspecting into false safety. But little Joe, the wiry farmer with hands gnarled from years of labor, knew better. He had been raised on stories of mischief and trickery. He had seen the worst of humanity, how desperation can twist a person's heart, and he had learned to stay one step ahead of those who would take what wasn't theirs. As the clock struck midnight, two figures slinked through the fields, their movements calculated and stealthy. Clad in black, they were shadows against shadows, driven by thoughts of quick cash and easy prey. The barn, with its weathered wood and rusted hinges, loomed in front of them, a treasure chest filled with tools, equipment, and maybe even some cash tucked away in a drawer. Little Joe watched from the window of his modest farmhouse, his keen blue eyes piercing through the darkness. He chuckled softly to himself, a gentle rumble in his chest, as he sensed their unwelcome presence. He didn't need fancy security systems or high-tech alarms. He had lived through enough seasons to understand the rhythms of life, and tonight he had a plan. As the robbers approached the barn, a faint rustling came from the bushes beside Joe's house. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest hint of unease. Little Joe picked up his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The two figures froze, their backs straightening in the glow of the light. For a moment, the world held its breath. Joe called out, his voice steady and commanding. The robbers glanced at each other, confusion flickering in their eyes. No one expected to be caught in the act, least of all by a farmer who seemed like an easy target. But little Joe was far from that. Years of living in harmony with nature had taught him to be alert. The wind, the critters, even the night sky, it all told a story. Joe stepped out into the moonlight, revealing his sturdy frame and resolute spirit. To the robbers, he must have seemed a picture of unyielding strength. There was an undeniable tension as he stood there, a lone guardian of his land with the quiet hum of the night wrapping around him like a cloak. He pointed the flashlight directly at them, illuminating their faces wide, eyes full of fear. "Now, I reckon you boys have made a terrible mistake," he continued, taking slow steps forward. There was no need for panic. Joe's voice was a calm sea against their storm. Joe interrupted, his tone unwavering. "Let me tell you something about this farm. It may seem quiet, but it's got a heartbeat." Suddenly, Joe's dog, a fierce border collie named Rex, erupted from the shadows, barking ferociously. The sound echoed off the barn walls like thunder, a harsh reminder that the farmer was never truly alone. The sight of the dog sent the robbers into a tailspin. Panic twisted their features. They didn't count on Rex. This farm was not just a bundle of crops, it was also home to a loyal guardian. Feeling the weight of their decision settle heavily on their shoulders, the robbers turned to flee. But little Joe wasn't letting them get away that easily. He called out, "You really think I'd let you off that easy?" In that split second, a rush of adrenaline surged through Joe's veins. He was no longer just a farmer, he was a sentinel of his land. With strength that belied his years, he took off after them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The night air filled with urgency as he chased them, fueled by his unwavering resolve. He shouted, and for a moment the world fell silent. Even the night creatures held their breath as if they sensed the stakes rising. The robbers stumbled, and one of them went down, catching his ankle on a gnarled root, his cry piercing through the night. Little Joe skidded to a halt, standing over the fallen man. "You wanted a fortune, but all you found tonight is trouble," he said, his voice steady. The sight of the downed robber rivaled the wildflowers that grew in abundance around the farm, beautiful yet tragically out of place. The truth washed over Joe like a wave. These boys were not just criminals. They were desperate, cornered animals grasping for survival. "Listen, I could call the sheriff right now," he warned, "but I reckon you're not so different from me. You want to survive. Life is hard out here, but this ain't the way." The other robber, realizing his partner was in trouble, turned to face Joe. "Please, we just need some money to get by." Joe let out a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. The world was full of stories like theirs, tales of survival that were both tragic and familiar. He thought of the evenings after a long day in the fields, sharing meals with his family and the comfort that came with knowing they were safe and secure. "It doesn't have to end this way," Joe said, his voice softening, a gleam of understanding flickering in his eyes. "You want cash, you're looking at the wrong place. Work with me instead. Earn it." The robbers exchanged glances, grappling with the weight of Joe's offer. Despair fought with curiosity as they considered the path laid out before them, risking everything for a quick score, or choosing the harder road of honesty and labor. With a cautious nod, the fallen robber slowly got up, his face a mask of uncertainty. "I don't want trouble," Joe replied, his voice calm and firm. "This land has enough hardship as it is." Night gave way to dawn as they entered the farmhouse, a world of warmth that contrasted starkly with the previous darkness. Little Joe offered them coffee and breakfast, a gesture that deepened the silence among them. Sizzling bacon and fresh eggs filled the air, a reminder that kindness can often be found in the most unexpected places. The meal was awkward at first, silence settling like a heavy fog. Little Joe watched as the young men glanced around, soaking in the simple yet rich life that radiated warmth. The hustle of roosters outside and the faint hum of the world waking up created a backdrop for this unusual gathering. Joe eventually asked, probing gently. The taller robber, biting into a piece of toast, finally spoke up. "We lost our jobs about a month ago." His voice was shaky, revealing layers of frustration and fear that hung like loose threads. "Life can throw some hard punches," Joe nodded, understanding. He had seen good folks fall on tough times, often when they least expected it. "But there are better ways to get back on your feet," he added firmly, a sense of commitment coursing through him. The fallen robber spoke again, this time more assured. "I don't believe in shutting the door on people who are willing to change. Go on, grab yourselves a plate and pull up a seat. You're here now and we'll figure this out," Joe replied, warmth flooding back into the room. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, peeling layers off the darkness, something began to shift in the hearts of the young men. In that simple farmhouse, they found an unexpected lifeline, a chance to turn their fortunes around, an opportunity forged in the middle of chaos. Days turned into weeks, and the once shadowy figures transformed into diligent workers among the fields. Little Joe guided them through the lessons of farming life, instilling in them not just the value of hard work, but the dignity that comes with it. They learned how to plant seeds, till the earth, and care for animals. Slowly but surely, they found their footing. In the twilight, as they labored beneath the sunset, the tension of that fateful night became just a haunting memory. The stories of their past lives faded, replaced by the vibrant colors of fields bursting with green, and the intoxicating sweetness of newfound hope began to blossom in their hearts. And as the moon rose again over Hollow Creek Farm, standing proud and unchanged, little Joe, the wise farmer, looked out over the land he loved, knowing that sometimes true strength lies not just in guarding what you have, but in opening your heart to those willing to change. The moon hung high and heavy in the sky, casting a ghostly glow over Hollow Creek Farm. A stillness enveloped the land, broken only by the rhythmic rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. It was the kind of night that promised peace, an illusion as it turned out. As darkness deepened, two figures crept through the overgrown weeds lining the property, their eyes darting like hungry foxes. Clad in black, they moved swiftly, barely making a sound. They were ghosts in the night, driven by fear and desperation, their minds clouding judgment. The barn was in sight, a loathed haven, filled with tools, supplies, and maybe a bit of cash. But what they didn't know was that little Joe, the farmer who held the keys to that very treasure, was wide awake. He had lived long enough to recognize the signs, the way the wind turned chilly, the unsettling absence of night sounds, and the peculiar stillness that settled before mischief. Joe had seen enough to know trouble had its own signature, and they were wearing it tonight. From his window, he could see the shadows forming across his fields, not quite blending with the world around them. He leaned in closer, straining to listen. The barn door creaked slightly, a sound like a child's whisper full of secrets. Joe set his coffee cup down and wiped his hands on a ragged towel. This wasn't his first rodeo. He wasn't going to be caught unaware. With a quiet resolve, he grabbed his flashlight, the worn handle smooth in his grip. It was an old friend, one that had guided him through countless nights spent on the farm. He opened the front door, the creaking hinges echoing through the still air. Standing on his porch, Joe felt a strange mix of calm and urgency, as if he were about to meet the storm head-on. The robbers were inside the barn now. They had forced the door, perhaps too eager, perhaps too clumsy. Joe's heart raced. This was the moment the training of a lifetime kicked in. He stepped down into the night, every footfall purposeful and proud. The moon was bright, but shadows lay thick around him. He moved toward the barn, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating the way. The night felt electric, charged with tension, and as he approached the barn, a sense of clarity washed over him. He shouted, his voice booming across the fields. Inside the barn, the robbers froze, their breath hitching in their throats. They hadn't expected to be caught like this. They were not seasoned criminals. They were two desperate young men clutching at straws. One of them called out, trying to sound tough, but his voice trembled, betraying his fear. Farmer Joe, was the simple reply, both mightier and warmer than any weapon. The silence stretched for a moment, thick and suffocating. Joe could almost hear their hearts racing, beating like a war drum in the stillness of the night. He stepped into the barn, letting the beam of his flashlight wash over the dusty crates, old machinery, and scattered tools. The dim glow caught the eyes of the intruders, reflecting panic back at him. Joe continued, maintaining his strong, steady voice. You thought it would all be quiet, that nobody was watching. The taller of the two robbers took a step back. Look, we didn't mean any harm, he stammered. We needed money. Joe felt a twist in his gut, a mix of empathy and resolve. He had worked hard all his life, but he also knew the struggles that came with it. He had seen families torn apart by desperation and hunger, had watched good people make wrong choices. But this wasn't the way. You might be struggling, but that doesn't give you the right to take from others, Joe said calmly, his flashlight now directed at the floor, giving them a moment to breathe. As the barn slowly filled with tension, Joe's words hung heavily in the air. Around them was the scent of fresh hay, the warmth of hard work, and the echoes of lives lived from sunup to sundown. The robbers stood still, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Listen, Joe said, gently this time, I get it. Life can knock you down, but taking from me won't change that. You think this is going to solve your problems. Joe took a step closer, closing the distance, a deliberate move. He wasn't going to be intimidated, he was going to show them a different way. How about you let me help you? I need hands on my farm, you can work for your keep. There was a palpable moment of hesitation. The robbers exchanged glances, calculating their options. Fear danced with curiosity in their expressions. Joe could see the cogs turning, the gears shifting from desperation to intrigue. Work, the shorter one said, disbelief dripping from his voice. Yeah, Joe affirmed, his stance steady and his gaze unwavering. Everybody deserves a second chance. You could leave your troubles behind, learn a trade. Joe's gamble rested on his honest belief in redemption. He knew he wasn't just offering them a job, he was offering them a lifeline. But what will we do? The taller robber said, uncertainty etching lines on his forehead. You'd be amazed at the kind of work that needs doing around here, Joe replied with a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. From tending crops to taking care of the cattle, there's something for everyone. Joe felt the shift in the air, a tiny crack opening up in their defenses. For a moment, all three of them stood alone in the barn, held by the gravity of Joe's words. It felt strange to talk about work in a place that had been the epicenter of conflict just moments before. Yet the air was lighter now, as if the thick darkness had finally begun to dissolve. But what about our mistakes? The shorter one said, guilt hanging over him like a cloud. Everyone makes mistakes, son, Joe replied, his voice now softer, filled with understanding. What defines you is what you do next. The taller robber wiped a hand across his face, taking a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. Absolutely, Joe confirmed, offering a nod that felt weighted with conviction. But you have to meet me halfway. Moments passed, and finally, the two men exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Within that shared silence echoed the fragility of their plight, the vulnerability that wrapped around them like a winter chill. "I guess we don't have much else to lose," the shorter one said, a tremor of desperation still lingering in his voice, but now it was mixed with hope. "Good choice," Joe replied, excitement shimmering beneath his calm demeanor. They stood there in the moonlight, shadows melding into something new, a choice, a chance. Together, they stepped from the darkness of the barn and into a world that seemed ripe with possibility. The weight of guilt and hardship would not disappear overnight, but there was something profoundly healing in this moment. Days passed, blending into weeks. Little Joe watched the two men begin to weave themselves into the fabric of the farm. Early mornings found them at the crack of dawn, the sun creeping over the horizon, casting golden light across the fields. Side by side, they planted, tilled, and learned. With each passing day, they earned not only their keep but also something more valuable: dignity. The calloused hands that once thought only of taking now found the pride of building. "Ain't no better feeling than seeing something you've planted grow," Joe would say, pointing to the green shoots pushing through the soil, a testament to hard work. They labored, sweat trickling down their brows, the sun warming their skin and the earth nourishing their spirits. The laughter they shared began to fill the spaces once draped in silence. With time, they became an integral part of the Hollow Creek family. They celebrated together through storms, shared meals under the stars, and formed bonds that transcended their pasts. The line between farmer and former robbers blurred, replaced by something stronger, a shared purpose. As the fields continued to bloom, the robbers learned the trade, learned about responsibility and hard work, and slowly life began to show them a different path. The hard winters turned into fruitful springs, and they felt the satisfaction of earning a living from the sweat of their brows. They no longer worked in the shadow of theft, but instead stood in the sunshine of redemption. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with oranges and pinks, they gathered at the farmhouse for a meal. Joe looked around the table, filled with laughter and camaraderie, recognizing the beauty of transformation. "New beginnings," they echoed back, a sense of pride swelling in their voices. That night, as the moon rose high over Hollow Creek Farm, little Joe reflected on how destiny had taken a different turn. What had started as an encounter steeped in shadows had turned into a story of light. Life had a way of unfolding, teaching lessons even in the darkest moments. And as the stars twinkled overhead, whispering their eternal truths, Joe knew the heart of a farmer wasn't just about sowing seeds in soil. It was about nurturing hope, about every life having its chance to blossom, even amidst the chaotic shadows of night. The clock struck midnight, and a blanket of silence wrapped itself around Hollow Creek Farm. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silvery light over the fields, illuminating the rustic old farmhouse and the substantial barn where generations of hard work lived within the walls. A soft breeze rustled through the corn rows, carrying the scent of earth and ripening crops. But on this particular night, distant shadows ventured across the landscape, shadows that didn't belong. Under the cloak of darkness, two figures moved cautiously, eyes darting nervously, driven by the desperation that had become all too familiar in their lives. As they approached the barn, adrenaline surged through them, each step heavy with anxiety. They had heard stories. This farm was known to be abundant, and in their minds it was filled with treasures to be had. What they didn't know was that little Joe, the farmer, was wide awake, sitting at his kitchen table with mug in hand. Rugged and resilient, with weathered skin mapped by years of hard labor, he had grown accustomed to the night and its secrets. He felt the change in the air, the stillness thickening into something ominous. Joe's instincts had sharpened over the years, honed by every storm weathered and every hard winter endured. Desperation, he knew, was a potent force that could twist even the best of men into desperate thieves. And as he took a sip from his coffee, he felt something, but not fear. It was clarity, determination. He had seen this movie play out before. The moonlight bathed the barn entrance in an ethereal glow, but it wasn't enough to hide the two robbers, now standing at the door, tension rippling through them. Heartbeats raced as one of them quickly pulled out a crowbar to pry open the door. With silent resolve, Joe rose from the table, the old wooden floors creaking beneath him as he moved. He had a plan. Grabbing his flashlight, it flickered to life in the dim kitchen light. Unbeknownst to the would-be thieves, this wasn't his first encounter with mischief under the cover of darkness. "Looks like I'm not the only one awake," he muttered to himself, channeling all his focus and energy into the situation. He stepped out onto the porch and looked into the night, the cool air kissing his skin as he aimed the beam of light toward the barn. A sudden crash echoed through the stillness as the crowbar met the barn door. Joe's heart quickened, but his mind sharpened. He had dealt with thieves before, and he knew that the best weapon he held wasn't just the flashlight but his experience. Joe's voice boomed, cutting through the night. His tone was both calm and commanding, deep enough to echo off the barn walls. Inside, the robbers froze, eyes widening in panic. The very act of their thievery sputtered before them, overshadowed by the chilling realization that they had been discovered. One of them shouted, trying to mask the tremor in his voice with bravado. "I'm the one who's going to make sure you don't walk out of here with anything that isn't yours," Joe replied, stepping closer, the flashlight swinging to illuminate their faces, revealing their youthful desperation. The second robber cursed under his breath, fumbling for an excuse. "We didn't mean any harm, Joe repeated, stepping into the barn, his silhouette framed against the soft moonlight. "And stealing it from me is the answer. Let me tell you, I've seen times that make your troubles look like a walk in the park. You think I don't know uncertainty?" He could see the edge of panic settling in their eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a mix of sympathy and annoyance. They were kids, really, perhaps just a few years older than his own son. He felt that familiar tug at his heart, a memory of his younger days when times were hard, when he had thought of taking the easy path but had always chosen to fight for what he had instead. "Listen," he said, lowering his flashlight for a moment, letting the beam dip as if inviting them to truly see the situation. "You're making a choice tonight. This can end badly for you." The taller robber shifted from foot to foot, his self-confidence crumbling. "You don't understand. We're hungry. We just lost our jobs, man." "The world is full of despair, kid," Joe said, his voice softening but remaining firm. "But this isn't the way to fix it. If you want cash, why not come to work on my farm? Earn what you need rather than taking it." For a moment, confusion danced across the young men's faces. This wasn't the response they had anticipated. The tension in the barn still hung heavy, but there was a glimmer of hope, a crack emerging in their fear-reserved hearts. The shorter robber echoed skeptically. "Absolutely. There's always something a farmer needs done. Crops need tending, animals need feeding, and I could use the help. Work hard and I'll pay you." The taller robber exchanged glances with his partner, the desperate edge still hanging in the air but now flavored with uncertainty. "Then we talk, and I'll teach you how to do it better," Joe replied, his voice steady, firm. "How about that? No tricks here, just hard labor." Silence enveloped them again. It felt fragile, as if the choice before them teetered on the brink of possibility. Extending a branch of kindness in a harsh world, was it really that easy? "I don't know," the shorter robber finally said, hesitant. "It seems." "Maybe," Joe replied with a gentle smile. "But sometimes good things happen when you least expect them. Take a chance." And just like that, the air shifted. The weight of the night felt lighter as their resolve hung in uncertainty between them. These two robbers, driven by desperation, now stood at a crossroads, offered a chance at redemption. "I could use the work," the shorter one mumbled. Joe nodded, sensing the breakthrough. "All right then." Tentatively, the robbers stepped forward. Hesitantly, they clasped hands with Joe. A deal made not in dark intentions, but in the flickering light of hope. And so, the night shifted from thievery to camaraderie, from fear to understanding. They spent the rest of the night discussing the contours of their new agreement, the air around them alive with possibilities. As dawn broke, painting the sky with shades of crimson and gold, Joe welcomed them into his home for breakfast. The warm scent of eggs and bacon filled the air, but more importantly, it filled their hearts with something they hadn't tasted in a long while: belonging. Days turned into weeks as the farm blossomed with activity. Little Joe taught them every aspect of farm life, from planting seeds to milking cows, from fixing fences to harvesting crops. With each passing day, the robbers transformed, not just into workers, but into integral parts of the Hollow Creek family. They laughed together amid rows of corn and fields of green, joy mingling with sweat. The feeling of accomplishment welled up within them as they watched the fruits of their labor flourish under the sun. One evening, after a long day's work, they gathered around a fire pit that Joe had set up just outside the barn. Flickering flames cast shadows on their faces, illuminating their expressions of contentment. With tired muscles but filled spirits, they shared stories that night, stories of hardship, of choices made and lessons learned. "It always seems too easy," the taller robber admitted, gazing into the flames. "We just thought we'd take what we could get." "A life of stealing only leads to misery," Joe chimed in, his voice thoughtful. "Believe me, it's a long road home when you start off on the wrong foot." As the warmth of the fire wrapped around them, Joe felt immense pride. What had begun as a night of fear had blossomed into something beautiful. He had transformed two lost souls into young men filled with purpose. As weeks turned into months, the three of them became inseparable, the farm thriving under their care. Each newly harvested crop became a testament to second chances and heartfelt growth. The robbers, who had once crept across the land looking to take what wasn't theirs, were now stewards of the earth. One particularly chilly evening, as blankets of stars adorned the sky, the farm was alive with laughter. Joe turned to the young men who had become so much more than mere workers. He exclaimed, a twinkle in his eye, "You've turned a new leaf." The taller one clapped him on the shoulder, laughter dancing from his lips. As the warmth of friendship enveloped them, it became apparent that the darkness that had once threatened them had transformed into a bond of family built on mutual respect and shared experience. So beneath that vast starry sky, a powerful narrative began anew, woven between a farmer and two young men once lost in shadow, now shining bright, reaching for dreams they had once abandoned. Life had twisted and turned in ways they never could have imagined, but through it all, Joe had found the one thing he believed in above all else, that even the most desperate paths can lead to redemption when guided by kindness and compassion. And as dawn broke, lightly painting the horizon, it marked not just a new day, but a fresh start for all, an unwavering belief that light can emerge from darkness if only one has the courage to see it coming. The clock struck midnight, a chime echoing across the quiet landscape of Hollow Creek Farm. A dense fog rolled in, swallowing the fields in a shroud of mystery. The moon, though bright, barely managed to illuminate the narrow path leading up to the old wooden barn, its weathered doors standing guard over years of toil. Inside that barn, two figures huddled close, dressed in dark clothing, hearts racing in anticipation. They were drifters, barely in their 20s, and desperation clung to them like the mist. They exchanged nervous glances, silent questions passing between them. It wasn't their first attempt at thievery. They were fueled by the fears of survival. But what they didn't know was that Farmer Joe, a man seasoned by struggles and victories, was wide awake. He sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, his eyes focused on the tree line, watching the shadows shift. He had always felt a connection to the night, an understanding that went beyond mere intuition. He sensed trouble long before it appeared. Years of listening to the land, the rustle of the corn, the call of the owls, the nocturnal life stirring had sharpened his instincts. When a heavy silence settled over the farm, it wasn't rest that lingered, it was foreboding. With a sense of quiet determination, Joe rose from the table, leaving the warmth of the kitchen. He felt each creak of the floorboards beneath his boots, reminding him that every sound counted tonight. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face, invigorating him. There was no mistaking it, something was off. The barn door was ajar. Shadows slipped through the gap like thieves in the night, because that's precisely what they were. Joe's heart pounded in tandem with the crunch of gravel beneath his feet. Breathing deeply, he steadied himself. He had faced worse predators than these two. He called out, his voice cutting through the heavy air. The two robbers froze, instincts kicking in as they scrambled to hide in the shadows. A stolen glance toward each other revealed fear and panic, but little else. They hadn't expected to be caught. One of them shouted, trying to sound tough, but his voice trembled. Joe could hear the fear, the uncertainty underlying bravado. Joe declared, his tone powerful but calm, I suggest you make your exit." Inside the barn, the robbers exchanged hurried whispers. Time hung in the air like an old clock about to strike, and in that moment Joe found clarity. He drew upon years of experience, knowing this was not about playing the hero. This was about survival, a lesson he had learned himself long ago. With firm resolve, he stepped closer to the barn. "Listen, boys, you might be thinking you're gonna make a quick score tonight, but I'll tell you right now, that's not how this works around here." The taller robber shouted back, edging toward bravado once more. Joe interrupted, his voice steady. "You'll make a poor choice that could haunt you. You want cash, you want food." They weren't expecting those words. The air shifted again, the robbers' bravado unwinding as they hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The shorter one asked, confusion mingling with desperation. "I'm saying you could work for it," Joe replied simply, his heartbeat steadying. "Life has a way of making hard times harder, but stealing will only deepen your troubles." Simmering tension filled the barn, but suddenly Joe's calmness seemed to breach the walls of their anxiety. For all their plans and desperation, they had no real idea of the man they were confronting. The taller robber repeated, disbelief etched on his face. "Because I've seen too many good folks lost to the dark side of desperation. Trust me, hands work wonders. It gives purpose. It pulls folks up from the depths," Joe explained, stepping a little closer again, his flashlight illuminating the fear in their eyes. "Everyone deserves a chance." It was a gamble, and Joe knew it. But he also understood the power of redemption, the possibility of turning lives around with something as simple as an open door. With every shaky breath, he could see their hesitation, the flicker of curiosity sparking within them. The farm could have been a fortress in the night, but Joe was offering lifelines instead of threats. For those moments, the barn felt less like a place of crime and more like a space filled with potential, a canvas where new stories could be painted. "Fine," the shorter man murmured, his bravado crumbling. Joe nodded slowly, relief washing over him. "There's a lot to take care of on this farm. You'll help with the crops, feed the animals, and learn. That beating heart you think you're running from, it'll guide you." Minutes passed, filled with unspoken questions, but under that moonlit sky, barriers began to crumble. It took a while, but they finally extended their hands, and Joe clasped them firmly, sealing their pact in the chill of night. Out of that darkness, a fragile light began to shine. Joe led them to his home, setting out breakfast, a humble start filled with warmth and opportunity. A meal shared, a promise made. With hot coffee steaming in mugs and eggs sizzling on the stove, they broke bread in silence, only the sound of forks clinking against plates punctuating the morning air. As days turned into weeks and the sun climbed higher in the sky, the farm took on a new rhythm. Little by little, Joe taught the young men how to cultivate the land, to grow crops and tend to the livestock. They learned how to harness their energy into something productive, finding pride in their efforts, something they had nearly lost in the spiral of desperation. They were not just robbers now, they were farmers in the making, their hands becoming callous not from crime, but from work. Each sunrise painted new possibilities in the sky, filled with the thrill of hard-earned fruit, both literal and metaphorical. There were setbacks, of course. Days when the work felt overwhelming, when they questioned whether they could truly turn their lives around. But Joe remained a steady mentor, guiding them with a firm hand and a kindly heart. "Life is a series of choices," he'd often remind them while they toiled in the fields. The lessons extended beyond the physical labor. It was about persistence, resilience, the very things that had anchored Joe through years of hardships. He shared stories of his own journey, times when he had doubted his strength, the moments when the farm felt like too much to bear. "It's not about never falling," he'd say. And rise they did, finding themselves in every furrow turned and every seed planted. Together, they watched the crops grow, the fruits of their labor blooming under the sun. One whimsical afternoon, the robbers-cum farmers stood beside Joe, surveying the vast fields sprawling before them. "We never would have imagined," the taller one admitted, his voice tinged with awe. "Exactly," Joe replied, pride swelling in his chest. "This is yours to protect as much as mine." As days turned into months, a bond formed. The young men became part of the Hollow Creek family, They laughed together, struggled together, and shared meals beneath the stars, the sense of belonging growing deeper with every passing moment. One quiet night, Joseph gathered them around the fire pit. Stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across velvet, creating an enchanting backdrop. "You did good," he said, looking at both men, his gaze soft and warm. Both men exchanged glances, reflecting on their journey, one that had begun in shadows but blossomed into a path radiating with light. "Life could have taken us anywhere, but we found our way back here," the shorter one said, a smile growing on his face. "That's the beauty of it all," Joe nodded, his heart full. "There's always a way back if you're willing to seek it out." As night enveloped them, the warmth of the fire cradled them in safety, each flicker embodying hope. What had started as fear transformed into resilience, a testament to the strength of human spirit. In the months that followed, they continued to grow, to learn, to explore the deeper meanings of community and purpose. The barn that once stood as a fortress against them became a sanctuary of growth and nurturing. Laughter echoed through the fields, harmonizing with the gentle rustling of the corn. With every new dawn came promise, filling them with gratitude. They had transformed not just as individuals, but as a unit, weaving their fates together into something beautiful. The lessons they learned echoed far beyond the realm of farming. It was about facing the world with integrity, about making amends when life pulled them down. One autumn day, as the harvest came in, the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. Joe stood at the edge of the field, surveying the bounty they had nurtured together. For a moment he felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him, a blend of memories both bitter and sweet. Turning back to the farm, he smiled as he watched the two former robbers, now young men filled with purpose, hauling baskets brimming with produce. They laughed and shared stories, embodied joy becoming infectious. The taller one called out, a triumphant grin on his face. "You want to help us celebrate this harvest?" "No, son, you did this," Joe replied, his heart swelling with pride. "You found your way back." As the sun set behind the horizon, they gathered for a feast that night under the stars. Plates overflowing with food, laughter echoing into the cool air, and a sense of belonging that pulled at the strings of the heart. They knew they were not bound by their past mistakes anymore. They were lifted high by their newfound strength and community. In that moment, Joe knew life could twist unexpectedly, but out of every dark corner, a chance for brightness could be born if one only had the tenacity to chase it. Life was indeed a farm, and they were all planting seeds of hope, watered by lessons learned under the moonlit sky. As laughter rang out, Farmer Joe felt empowered, recognizing that each choice mattered more than the last. They were no longer just farmers, they were dreamers, standing together united by redemption and purpose. And with that, the cycle continued, an ever-spinning wheel, cultivating resilience and camaraderie in the rich soil of Hollow Creek Farm. A chill hung in the air as the clock struck midnight at Hollow Creek Farm. The moon cast a silver sheen upon the fields, illuminating the old barn that had stood for generations, a silent witness to the stories of toil and triumph, of life lived close to the earth. But on this particular night, beneath the veil of darkness, two figures crept into the scene, silhouettes against a backdrop of silence. They were nervous and desperate, driven by an overwhelming need to survive. The taller one, Zach, exchanged glances with his partner, Mike. Their breaths came in hurried whispers, anxiety pulsing like a drumbeat between them. They had heard tales of the farmer, tales of a grizzled man who guarded his land fiercely. Yet here they were, fueled by hunger, eager to breach the fortress they thought would be an easy score. Their hearts raced as they neared the barn door. In their minds, it was a treasure trove waiting to be plundered: tools, equipment, maybe even a little cash. What they didn't realize was that Farmer Joe was not your average countryman. He was keen, razor-sharp, and had seen enough hardship to understand the looks of desperation. Inside his farmhouse, Joe sat at the kitchen table, finishing his late-night coffee. Something felt wrong. The steady rhythm of the night was altered. An unsettling tension crackled in the air. He had lived here long enough to read the signs, the gentle rustle of leaves, the sudden hush that blanketed the night, and even the way the stars flickered above as though sensing a disturbance. Then came a soft creak, the unmistakable sound of the barn door being nudged open. Joe set his mug down, his instincts kicking in. Years of hard work had made him vigilant. He couldn't let his guard down now. He grabbed a flashlight from the counter, its metal cold but familiar in his grip, and stepped into the night. As he approached the barn, he could see shadows flickering inside, moving about in a hurried panic. The robbers, unaware of his presence, fumbled as they tried to figure out their next move. Joe could feel his heart thumping, but it wasn't fear weighing him down. It was resolve. These boys, driven by desperation, had chosen a dangerous path, and tonight he wouldn't let their choices lead them any further astray. He shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. The robbers jumped, startled. Panic bloomed across their faces. They hadn't prepared for confrontation. Surprise filled the air, turning their initial bravado into confusion. Zach called out, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked under the weight of fear. "Owner of this farm," Joe replied, stepping into the barn. The flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating their startled faces. The shock between them was palpable. They hadn't expected the farmer to confront them, to stand his ground. Mike, the shorter of the two, stammered, "We didn't mean any harm, we just—" Joe sized them up, seeing not just two robbers but two young men drowned in desperation, their youth tinged with the weight of poor choices. He felt a pang of sympathy for them. He understood hunger, the kind that gnaws at your insides and clouds your judgment. "Listen," Joe said, keeping his voice steady, "I know what it's like to feel lost, to be pushed to your limits, but this isn't the way." Panic etched itself into Zach's features, but the intensity of Joe's words resonated. "We don't want any trouble, we—" Joe interrupted, his gaze firm but not unkind. "Thought you could sneak in here and take what you wanted. That's not how it works. You want something, earn it, work for it." Both men paused, confusion mingling with disbelief. This wasn't the reaction they had anticipated. They had expected anger, confrontation, maybe even violence. Instead, the farmer stood before them, offering kindness wrapped in challenge. Mike echoed, his voice trembling. "Farmers need hands. I could use the help," Joe responded, his gaze unwavering. "But you have to change your ways." For a moment, the air was thick with uncertainty. The promise of easy cash juxtaposed against a difficult but rewarding path weighed heavily on their minds. In that breathless silence, Joe felt the tension shift, as if their very souls teetered on the edge of decision. Zach asked, glancing at Mike, who nodded, a flicker of hope igniting behind his eyes. "We've got no choice," Mike whispered. "Yes, you are," Joe replied, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Moments passed like hours, but Joe remained calm, extending a hand toward them. It took a second, but Zach slowly reached out, his grip shaking as he clasped Joe's hand. "I guess we'll give it a try," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Mike followed suit, and there they stood, three men, bound by choices made in darkness yet leaning toward the light. Some might have thought Joe was foolish, inviting potential thieves into his home, but he understood something fundamental about humanity. Everyone deserves a chance, especially those standing at the brink of despair. "Come on," Joe said, leading them to the farmhouse. As they entered the cozy kitchen, the warm light glowed against the wooden beams, and the comforting scent of morning breakfast filled the air. Joe put on a pot of coffee and set scrambled eggs and bacon on the table, the sound of sizzling a small reminder of normalcy. Zach asked, his voice full of surprise. "Nothing," Joe said with a smile. Breakfast passed with words hesitating like timid birds taking their first flight. With each morsel they consumed, the heavy shackles of shame began to loosen. Within that small kitchen, three lives began to mirror each other, weaving new paths from the fragments of the past. As days rolled into weeks, the barn transformed into a hub of activity. Joe showed them how to plant corn, tend to the cattle, and maintain the tools that were essential to farm life. Zach and Mike learned quickly, their youthful fervor bubbling to the surface as they immersed themselves in this new routine. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a warmth bloomed in their chests, an unearned pride swelling with each new task completed. They were not just workers, they were becoming part of the rhythm of the land. Some days they stumbled. They struggled with heavy bags of feed or admitted defeat when stubborn animals wouldn't cooperate. During those moments, Joe's steady guidance grounded them, teaching them that failure was just a stepping stone on the road to success. It's not about being perfect, it's about showing up to work hard every day, Joe would say. And learn they did. Day after day, week after week, they toiled beneath the sun, their hands transforming from the softness of suburban life to the hardened grips of labor. The weight they once carried on their shoulders began to lighten slowly but surely. Regret ebbed into confidence. One sunny afternoon, while tending to hay bales, Mike turned to Joe, wiping sweat from his brow. "You really believed in us, didn't you?" Joe paused, meeting his gaze. "Belief is powerful, my friend." As the harvest season rolled in, they stood together before the sprawling fields filled with golden corn. Their hard work, once a flicker of ambition, had transformed into a shiny reward. The fruits of their labor gleamed under the sunlight, and they felt something profound swell within them, a sense of accomplishment never before experienced. "Look at what we've done," Zach exclaimed, beaming with pride. "You sure did," Joe replied, an air of satisfaction swirling around him. And celebrate they did. On a balmy evening beneath the fading sun, Joe set up a fire pit outside, roasting ears of corn over open flames and cooking hearty stew in a cast-iron pot. Laughter filled the air, mingling seamlessly with the crackle of the fire and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. As they shared a meal, something shifted profoundly within Zach and Mike. They were no longer haunted by desperation. That chase turned into purpose, and purpose had grounded them to the earth they had once sought to rob. With each meal shared and every story recounted, the robbers had blossomed into men. The weight of their past was lighter, softened by newfound responsibility and camaraderie. They shared their thoughts, fears, dreams, the very fabric of their souls woven alongside Farmer Joe's heart. "Thank you for offering us this chance," Mike said, his voice filled with sincerity. Joe smiled, warmth radiating from his chest. "You found your way because you chose to put in the effort." As the night grew darker, laughter continued to fill the air, the warmth of the fire offering comfort against the cool breeze. They talked deep into the night, and for the first time in a long while, Zach and Mike felt the full weight of hope, a light illuminating a path they thought was lost. Life outside remained chaotic, but within the boundaries of the farm, they had built a sanctuary of belonging. Days blended into months, creating a rhythm so familiar and fulfilling that it echoed in their very beings. As the seasons changed, the farm thrived under their united care. They had become a family, each man contributing not just physically but emotionally, forging a bond that ran deeper than blood. Yet in the town nearby, whispers circulated about the farmer showing kindness to thieves, skepticism hanging in the air. Joe confronted these rumors with a calm disposition, understanding the cautious nature of humanity. In time, their work transformed perceptions. Those who once eyed them suspiciously began to see their commitment, their passion, and soon enough, respect bloomed, intertwining with trust. The community slowly embraced the changes happening at Hollow Creek Farm, witnessing the miracle of redemption unfold. Then one evening, while walking beneath the starlit sky, Zach turned to Joe, a contemplative look crossing his face. "Do you think everyone deserves a second chance?" "A second chance can change everything," Joe replied, his eyes glinting with wisdom. "Everyone makes mistakes. Each person you encounter carries something heavy." Those words resonated deeply. Never had Zach felt such clarity, nor the overwhelming feelings of gratitude unite in his heart. He looked back at the farm, the life he now lived, and was filled with purpose. Life continued on, rich with moments that filled their hearts. One morning, as the sun broke across the horizon, Joe gathered them all to discuss plans for expanding the farm. "I'm thinking of growing a community garden," he said, his eyes ablaze with enthusiasm. Zach and Mike exchanged eager glances, their excitement evident. This was more than just tilling soil. It was about leaving a legacy, about creating something to last beyond themselves. The vision slowly came together, and they worked tirelessly to establish the community garden. Their efforts breathed life into the barren land, brimming with fresh tomatoes, lettuce, and herbs. As neighbors began to gather, the community swelled with energy, a tapestry of hopes woven into each seed planted. That evening, the farm buzzed as laughter echoed through the garden, children running around, mothers chatting, and elders sharing stories. Joe stood at the heart of it all, reflecting on how far they had come, his heart swelling with pride for the community they had built. It wasn't just a garden. It was a reminder that kindness could transform lives, that courage could breed hope. As he watched the joy unfold before him, he realized that the barn no longer just held tools. It held lives reborn, futures flourishing. The path they had started on that fateful night had blossomed into something beautiful, a testament that even in the depths of desperation, light could find its way. And when the moon rose high above the fields, shining its silver light, Joe knew there was much more to come. The farm had turned from a place of labor to a sanctuary of grace, from despair into hope. Their story didn't just change their lives. It rippled through the community, uplifting spirits, inspiring trust, and reminding everyone that sometimes, when push comes to shove, all it takes is one kind act to change the course of many lives. In that moment, standing amidst the garden at Hollow Creek Farm, Joe felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. They had not only transformed a piece of land, they had reshaped their very destinies. As laughter and chatter filled the evening air, the warmth of community embraced them all. Each heart beat not just for survival, but for a brighter future, a vibrant testament to the power of redemption and the grace of second chances. Life, they learned, was not merely about survival. It was about thriving together. And that evening, in the golden glow of a setting sun, surrounded by shared dreams, they discovered that indeed hope could flourish anywhere, even from the darkest night. The night was thick with fog, a ghostly blanket that cloaked Hollow Creek Farm in silence. As the clock struck midnight, a soft illumination broke through the mist, the silvery light of the moon casting shadows across the land, but deep within the heart of that darkness, danger lurked. Two figures moved stealthily, their breaths quickening in the quiet as they neared the barn, each step carefully calculated yet drenched in desperation. Whispered Mike, glancing around as if the trees themselves could hear him. His partner, Zach, nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and fear. They could almost taste the adrenaline, a sweet and sour mix fueled by the desperation that had become their nightly companion. They had scoped out the farm for days, and it didn't seem like a hard target. Little Joe, the farmer, was notorious for his simple living, his humdrum life barely drawing attention. But what they didn't understand was that Joe was no ordinary farmer. He was a warrior, a soul forged in hardship, and he had weathered many storms in his life. To him, this land was sacred ground, and he would defend it fiercely. As they approached the barn, Mike could feel the weight of their decision. They were young men caught in a world of uncertainty, spiraling and searching for quick solutions. "Let's just get in and out," he urged quietly, memories of their empty fridges and worn-out shoes fresh in his mind. The hunger gnawed at him even now. The barn door creaked slightly as they nudged it open, and darkness swallowed them whole. Inside, the scent of hay and the soft rustle of animals filled the air, calming them momentarily. They imagined the tools and cash hidden away, riches that would temporarily lift the burden of their struggles. But just as their excitement began to bubble over, a thought pierced through the realization that they were crossing a line. Outside, the night continued to hold its breath as Joe sat quietly at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, eyes scanning the landscape through the window. He sensed a disturbance, a shift in the atmosphere. The stillness wasn't comforting, it felt like an omen. Years of farming had sharpened his instincts. He knew how to read the wind, how to recognize the signs. Rising from the table, he moved toward the door. Joe picked up a sturdy flashlight and stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. Each step felt purposeful. He sensed he was not alone. Inside the barn, Zach and Mike rummaged through boxes, the faint beam of their own flashlight illuminating the dust that had accumulated over time. They whispered excitedly, adrenaline pumping through their veins. It was everything they'd hoped for: an old toolbox, a few tools, and in the far corner, a weathered cash box. Zach exclaimed, eyes alight with greed. But just as they neared their prize, the beam of another flashlight sliced through the darkness, landing squarely on their faces. Panic surged and they froze, hearts pounding in their chests like wild animals. Joe's voice rang out, steady and unyielding. The robbers darted their gazes toward the door, but there stood Joe, an unwavering figure framed against the moonlight, the embodiment of calm authority. Despite the fear inching up their spines, this was not a man who would hesitate. We just got lost," Mike stammered, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "We thought this was," Joe repeated, taking a slow step forward. "You look like thieves to me." Zach's heartbeat raced and he felt trapped, but desperation kicked in. "We're just trying to get by, man." Joe paused, digesting their words. He saw fear in their eyes, a look he had worn many times in his own life. He understood struggle, he'd felt the pangs of desperation himself. There was a path before him and he stood at a crossroads. He could call the sheriff, instill fear, or he could extend a lifeline. "Listen," Joe said, his tone changing from confrontational to calm. "I know what it's like to feel hopeless. No one wakes up dreaming of robbery. But stealing isn't going to get you where you want to go. It only leads to more trouble." Zach echoed, disbelief dripping from his voice. Joe took another step closer, lowering the flashlight slightly, allowing the dim light to create an atmosphere of safety. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance. You can leave here tonight with nothing but shame, or you can come work for me." Time seemed to freeze in the barn as the two robbers processed what Joe was offering. They had expected anger, confrontation, maybe even violence. Instead, they found compassion wrapped in challenge. Mike asked, still trying to grasp the reality of the situation. "There's always work to be done," Joe explained. "I could use some strong hands. You want cash? Then let's talk about earning it instead of stealing it. You've made mistakes, and I get that." Caught in a whirlwind of emotions, the young men looked at each other, contemplating the unexpected offer. They had strolled into the barn with a simple plan, but now they stood at the precipice of a completely different future. Zach asked, glancing back toward the farmer who was patiently waiting, giving them the time they needed. "I don't know," Mike replied, his voice trembling with uncertainty. But deep down, he felt a flicker of hope, a spark igniting in their messy lives. "If you're willing to change your direction, I'm here to help," Joe said, his voice firm yet gentle, an open invitation rather than a threat. "I'm ready to teach you how to work hard and find your footing again." With every passing second, the weight of their past began to feel lighter. Zach took a deep breath and reached out to shake Joe's hand. "Okay." Mike followed suit, surprised at the surge of relief that flooded over him. They stood there, hands clasped tightly, united under the heavy gaze of the farmer who had offered them hope when they expected condemnation. "Good decision," Joe said softly, relief washing over his features. In the days that followed, the barn transitioned from a scene of potential crime to a hub of activity filled with laughter and camaraderie. Joe guided them through the ins and outs of farm life, collecting eggs, milking cows, and planting seeds. He taught them that hard work could cultivate not just crops but lives. They battled the elements and dealt with stubborn animals, but there was an undeniable bond forming between the three of them. Every sunset, they would gather to recap their day, every triumph celebrated, every failure treated as a lesson. Mike asked one evening as they cleaned tools, his hands dirty but his spirit bright. "Tomorrow we start planting squash," Joe replied with a grin. Zach chimed in, excitement bubbling over. They began to see farming as an adventure, a chance to breathe life into the soil and create something of their own. As their skills grew, so did the sense of belonging. They looked forward to mornings filled with purpose, afternoons spent under the sun, and evenings shared alongside a fire as the stars sang overhead. But it wasn't just about farming, it was about reclaiming their lives. Zach and Mike opened up about their pasts, how they had both come from families that struggled, and how long nights spent worrying about bills had pushed them to desperation. It was a cathartic release, a chance to shed the burdens they had carried for too long. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Mike admitted one night, warmth creeping up his spine as he savored a meal alongside his mentor and friend. "Hope isn't just something you wait for, it's something you build," Joe said, his sincerity echoing in the night. "Creating a life that matters takes hard work and commitment." Seasons changed, laughter filled the air, and the farm thrived. They watched crops grow healthily. They were learning how to nurture life. The barn, once a site of shame, became a sanctuary of hard-won achievements. And then came the day of their first harvest, a celebration of everything they had accomplished together. Farmers from neighboring lands joined in, bringing food to share, laughter ringing through the night like a song carried by the wind. As they gathered around the table, everyone raised their glasses into the air. Joe announced, warmth enveloping their hearts. The crowd echoed back, the sound reverberating against the wooden beams of the barn. It was an incredible moment seeing the fruit of their labor laid out across the table and sharing it with the community, a community that once viewed them with suspicion, now united in celebration. Each bite showed them they belonged, that they had found their way back from dark places. Joe beamed with pride as they sat together, sharing food and stories under the stars. "You have all come so far," he said. "You've turned your lives around, and it shows." Zach and Mike exchanged glances, their smiles bright. They felt like part of something greater, a family forged not by blood but through shared experiences. In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened further. They began to mentor younger kids from the community, teaching them how to plant and grow, sharing the knowledge that had once been offered to them. They knew the power of lifting each other up, and they lived it every single day. But not everything was smooth sailing. One evening, news swept through the community about a crime spree taking place in a neighboring town. Looting and theft painted a grim picture of what could happen when desperation reared its ugly head again. Fear cast shadows over the community and whispers spread like wildfire. Joe gathered the young men that night, the tension thick. "You've come too far to leave it all behind," he said, looking both of them in the eye. "I don't want to go back to that life," Zach confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. "You won't," Joe assured him. "If you ever feel the pull of that darkness, remember who you are now." In those moments of vulnerability, they found strength anew. They understood that it wasn't just about making the right choices. It was also about staying vigilant, helping others, and lifting each other up in times of need. As days turned into months, the seasons rolled on, and so did their stories. They became mentors, leaders in the community, trusted hands that others relied on, proving that change was indeed possible. They hadn't merely stolen from the shadows. They had forged a new identity in the light. Zach and Mike realized that their pasts didn't define them. It was their actions and commitment that built their futures. They were no longer desperate men. They were resilient farmers determined to make a difference. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch overlooking the fields, the sun set in vibrant hues while fireflies danced around them. It felt good. It felt right. Zach said, a hint of disbelief lacing his voice. "Yeah," Mike replied with a grin. As all of this unfolded, Farmer Joe not only reclaimed his land but also his faith in humanity. Watching those young men rise from the ashes brought everything full circle. He couldn't help but think of his own struggles, the times he had nearly lost his way but chose to fight back. What began as a night of theft had transformed into a treasure trove of hope, redemption, and growth. They had turned their lives around together, emerging stronger and more connected than ever before. In the twilight of that emotional journey, it became clear to Joe that this was about much more than farming. It was about fostering mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, love among those who had once been lost. And as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its glowing light over Hollow Creek Farm, Joe knew that while the night can bring darkness, it can also nurture possibilities. Every ending held the potential for new beginnings, a cycle worth celebrating. As laughter and camaraderie echoed through the fields, it painted a picture of resilience, one that would hold true for generations to come. They had faced their fears, embraced change, and built a life rich in hope, community, and purpose. It was a testament that no matter how far one may stray, the journey back to the light is always possible, if only you choose to believe it. The moon hung high, casting an ominous glow over Hollow Creek Farm, a place usually tranquil, bathed in whispers of crickets and the distant rustling of leaves. But on this particular night, the air felt charged, thick with anticipation and uncertainty. Somewhere in the quiet, two figures slipped silently through the shadows, their hearts pounding wildly. Zach and Mike had scoped out this farm for days, watching the old farmer go about his business. Their circumstances had driven them to desperation, leaving them with no choice but to consider the unthinkable. As they inched closer to the hulking structure that held promises of forgotten riches, the sense of dread danced in their stomachs, mixed with the thrill of what they believed would be their salvation. Whispered Mike, glancing around nervously. The darkness felt suffocating, almost alive. Zach nodded, trying to muster bravado, though his hands trembled. We've come this far, haven't we? Just in and out. As they reached the barn door, it creaked slightly under their touch, sending a spark of panic through them. The night held its breath, and beneath the eerie silence, something shifted in the air. Little did they know, Farmer Joe was no unwitting victim. He was a guardian of his land, a seasoned sentinel who had battled life's storms more times than he could count. Inside his farmhouse, Joe sat at a weathered wooden table, sipping coffee as he stared out the window. An unsettling feeling gnawed at him. The wind had changed, a warning in its whisper that something was off. He had spent enough nights watching the land to know its language. Shadows moved differently tonight, and instinct told him trouble was brewing. Joe rose from the table, his old bones creaking as he reached for the flashlight that had seen its share of midnight wanderings. With a resolve born from years of hard work, he stepped outside, pulling the door shut, protecting what was his. As he approached the barn, the sound of shuffling inside reached his ears, and his heart quickened, not out of fear but from determination. He was ready. The moonlight illuminated the barn entrance, casting long shadows, and in that stillness he could feel the tension brewing. Inside the barn, Zach and Mike were crouched low, flashlight beams swirling in chaos as they searched. The musty smell of hay wrapped around them like a fog, mixing with the scent of old wood. Their eyes widened when they spotted an old toolbox in the corner. "There's gotta be something valuable in here," Zach whispered, thrill coursing through him. Just then, a beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating their startled faces. They froze, panic washing over them like a wave. Joe's voice cut through the stillness, firm and steady. We're just looking for something," Mike stammered, caught off guard. The bravado he wore crumbled, replaced by fear. Joe stepped further into the barn, his towering figure breaking through the shadows. "I suggest you turn around and leave." "Look, we didn't mean any harm," Zach pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. The corners of Joe's mouth tightened as he considered their words. He understood hunger. It was a feeling that could twist good people into something they weren't. "Maybe so," he replied slowly. "But stealing from me isn't going to fix your problems." "You want food?" The robbers exchanged confused glances. Mike asked, disbelief heavy in his tone. "Because I believe every person deserves a chance," Joe said, the glow of his flashlight revealing the sincerity in his eyes. Time seemed to suspend. Rage buzzed beneath Zach and Mike's skin, but disappointment poured in as reality struck. They had entered the farm with a plan, but instead they were being offered a lifeline. "We're not trying to ruin your life." Zach took a deep breath, fear mingling with a new feeling he couldn't quite place hope. Joe took a step closer. "I'll teach you. Hard work builds character." Silent moments passed, filled with uncertainty. Slowly they hesitated, and then Zach reached out his hand. "All right." Joe nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "Good." As they stepped out of the barn, the once heavy air lightened. The darkness, which had cloaked their desperation, began to part, revealing the first glimmers of possibility. They headed toward the farmhouse, where the warmth and smell of pancakes filled the air, an unexpected welcome that made them feel strangely at home. Over breakfast, the tension in their bones eased. Joe shared stories of the land, of seasons past filled with struggles and triumphs. Occasionally, he caught the young men watching him, curiosity blossoming in the wake of every shared tale. They imagined a world beyond their turmoil, the sun rising on a life built through effort, not theft. As weeks turned into months, the farm flourished under their newfound camaraderie. The barn, once the site of desperation, transformed into a hub of laughter and hard work. They planted crops, tended to animals, and learned the rhythm of the land. With every passing day, the young men began to forge their identities anew, shaping their futures in ways they had never imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the men gathered over dinner in the farmhouse. Laughter echoed around the table as stories cascaded like rain, washing away their pasts. The world outside felt miles away. "I never thought I'd find joy in hard work," Mike mused, his eyes bright. "It's just the beginning," Joe replied, a hint of pride swelling in his chest. Yet as they celebrated and made plans for the future, flickers of fear occasionally crept in. News of a crime wave had begun to circulate in neighboring towns. People whispered about houses broken into, rumors of desperation spreading faster than the summer heat. Shadows loomed, and worry settled over the community like an unwanted visitor. One night, as they gathered again around the fire, the weight of uncertainty hung heavy. Zach asked, his voice laden with anxiety. Joe met his gaze, recognizing the fear in the young man's eyes. "We've constructed something worthwhile here," he reassured them, "but we can't be complacent." The next night, Joe found himself tossing and turning, thoughts racing. The wind howled outside, an eerie reminder that summer days wouldn't last forever. Something felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. It gnawed at him, pushing him from the warmth of his bed. Outside, the air was brisk, crisp with the scent of nature. He moved quietly toward the barn, drawn by an unseen force. And there, beneath the halo of the moonlight, he noticed a shadow of figure lurking at the edge of the property. His heart raced. He muttered to himself. He grabbed the flashlight and stepped forward, focusing on the silhouette, adrenaline surging through his veins. People often underestimated the darkness. It was a battleground, and tonight was no different. A flash of movement caught his eye. A second figure joined the first, and Joe felt the weight of the world crashing down on him. They were preparing to enter the barn. Without thinking, he called out, his voice resonant and commanding. "I see you." The figures froze, surprised. One replied, a challenge lurking beneath the bravado. Old emotions rose within Joe: anger, fear, but also resolve. "You can't steal what's been built here." "Built," the voice mocked. In that moment, Joe saw their faces, clear against the moonlight. They weren't strangers, they were the very people the town had whispered about. Desperate souls driven by fear. But just like that, the warmth of community began to drain from his body, replaced by a chilling realization. "Let me make it clear," Joe shouted, heart pounding. "You think you can break in and take what belongs to me?" Heavy silence followed, the tension crackling in the air like electricity. The night could feel it too. Shadows danced ominously, the air thick with anticipation. The other figure taunted, stepping out of the darkness with a glint of something in hand, a crowbar. And in that moment, something shifted deep within Joe. He faced every hardship he had ever known, every time he'd fought back against despair, every bit of darkness that had once nearly consumed him. He gripped the flashlight, the beam shining defiantly against their forms. "You don't get it. This isn't just a farm to me. This is my life." And with those words echoing in the air, the ground beneath them rippled with tension. Joe prepared himself for a fight he might have to face right here, right now. But as the figures advanced, he prepared to defend not just himself, but everything he had fought for: the land, the community, and the two young men he had uplifted from despair. In the distance, footsteps approached, and Joe's heart raced. Zach and Mike had come to his side, ready to protect the life they had built together. They stood shoulder to shoulder, unwavering. Zach shouted, fists clenched, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Mike remained poised, prepared for whatever may come. And on that fateful night, with shadows lurking, a confrontation hung in the balance. What would happen next? Would they stand together against those seeking to destroy their newfound lives? Or would the darkness of desperation threat to infiltrate their world once again? Their future hovered on the edge, an unspoken promise lingering in the air, waiting to be fulfilled or shattered. In that breathless moment, the choices they made would echo far beyond the moonlit fields, reshaping their lives in ways they had yet to imagine. And as the tension mounted, everything felt poised on a knife's edge. The night wasn't over yet.